Okay, Peter, one of many things we can agree on is that everybody loves a comeback story. What's one of your favorites?
Well, one of my favorites is a recent movie that came out called Boys in the Boat. And it's about the legendary story of the 1936 Olympics when the hardworking young students from the University of Washington came from behind to win the gold medal.
An Olympic comeback story. Those are the best kind. Today, we've got a comeback story that starts in the wild and ends in a high-tech laboratory.
This is Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, the podcast, Episode 3, Clones. I'm wildlife expert and educator Peter Gross.
And I'm wildlife ecologist Dr. Ray Wingrant. On our television show, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, Protecting the Wild, Peter and I discover hope in the face of new threats and meet the scientists, photographers, and activists leading the way.
On this podcast, we'll go deeper to find out what ignites their passion and how we can all live a little more harmoniously with wildlife in our midst. Ray, we've learned a lot about cloning of animals in recent history. I think the very first that I heard was Dolly, the famous sheep in Scotland.
Her name is Dolly. 7 months old, she may not be the monster imagined in a science fiction fantasy, yet the cuddly Finn Dorset lamb may represent a major landmark in the history of genetic engineering. On an ordinary farm
That
in
was
Scotland,
10 or 11 years old when that actually happened and made the news. And so you can imagine, being in elementary school, that was just pretty mind-blowing. But cloning is also being used to bring animals back from the brink of extinction. And in our Wild Kingdom Protecting the Wild episode, Conservation Comeback, I visited the place that's ground zero for this technology. The Frozen Zoo is a cryobank located at the San Diego Zoo, and it houses thousands of cells from hundreds of different species, including the very rare black-footed ferret.
So you're holding living cells of an animal that has passed away, but these cells have the genetic diversity that will help the population.
Honestly, it feels like hope is what it feels like. Its cells are alive and useful. It's really hopeful.
The origin of that DNA goes back to 1981, when the Hogg family discovered the body of a black-footed ferret on their cattle ranch in Meeteetse, Wyoming. For the show, I traveled there with our guest today, Jeff Ewelt, who runs ZooMontana.
Yeah, it's such a crazy story to me. So the family was sitting at their house on this beautiful ranch, and their dog, I believe his name was Shep, came up to their door carrying an animal in their mouth. And certainly, if you have dogs, they may come back with a ground squirrel or a prairie dog or something like that. And the family went out to see what the dog had, and the owner of the ranch noticed it was something a little bit different, and so called their local wildlife facility, the game warden, and he came out and he said, I think this is a black-footed ferret. And so they took it in for a study and sure enough found out it was indeed a black-footed ferret.
And at this point, did they think they were extinct?
They did. And so there was a small population that was found in the late 70s. That population was brought into captivity for breeding, but they died out. It did not work. And so they were blown away. And so immediately everybody obviously then came into this ranch and just started looking around and sure enough found these ferrets. I believe it was 18 to 20, if I remember right. And then that was when the decision was made. Let's bring all these animals into a captive setting to breed them to bolster their population. That's what was done. We now know that was a victorious opportunity for them. But yeah, we can thank a family dog for rediscovering this mammal. It's a wild story. It almost sounds made up, but it's true.
Good old Shep.
Good old Shep. By the way, Shep has a statue in Meeteetse, Wyoming. He's that famous.
That's right.
Better have a statue. That's what I'm talking about.
It's important to point out that these black-footed ferrets were plentiful when indigenous people were stewards of the land. Like lots of threatened wildlife, westward expansion of European settlers is what put the black-footed ferret on a fast track to extinction.
As settlers came here to America, they saw a lot of animals as threats, and prairie dogs were one of those animals that were seen as a threat by new settlers coming to the area.
And a threat for agriculture, I guess.
Yep, exactly right. And prairie dogs can be destructive. They can create, obviously, their burrows can be threats for cattle and any kind of livestock. And so they were eradicated. A lot like the bison were. And what ends up happening is obviously you eradicate the food source of some of these carnivores, and then that carnivore starts to suffer. And that's exactly what happened to the black-footed ferret. They lost their main food source. About 75% of a black-footed ferret's diet are prairie dogs.
But wait, is a ferret larger than a prairie dog?
No, and that's the amazing thing is that no, they're not actually. And so when you look at a black-footed ferret, you think of a domestic ferret, what they look like. Black-footed ferrets, maybe a little smaller than that. And prairie dogs are significantly bigger. But that said, about 75% of their diet are these prairie dogs. So when our prairie dogs were eradicated, it just decimated the black-footed ferret population. Now add to that disease and the plague, which helped decimate their population even more. And so they just kept getting, bad news after bad news that just kept taking that population further and further down until they were thought to be extinct.
I want to just pivot back a little bit more to our story. Tell Ray a little bit about maybe what the most exciting part or one of the highlights of filming the show was that she might be interested in.
Obviously, of course, being on the Hogg Ranch, I think was that top piece. Just being out there in the wilds of Wyoming and where the story kind of restarted again on that Hogg Ranch. But that said, Peter, I think one of the other areas that I really enjoyed was visiting the Recovery Center, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Black-footed Breeding Center.
Oh, yes, we hear you. But I'm also curious.
Yeah. Cesar is a young male.
Okay.
He's actually one of my juvenile males that is a proven sire this year. He sired a litter.
And then obviously while we were there, we got to watch, the process of how they get them ready for getting back out into the wild. And then of course, seeing the cloned ferret, the first cloned endangered species right there in front of us. I mean, this is a historical animal that we're looking at.
Her name is Elizabeth Ann. In 1988, the first black-footed ferret cells were collected, frozen, and stored in a secure lab. These cells became the first native endangered animal species from North America to be cloned. Elizabeth Ann is the result of that effort to restore a once thriving fixture on the landscape of the American West. Many of these ferrets, bred and raised at the Black-footed Ferret Breeding Center, will be released into the wild on the Hogg Ranch.
Yeah. It's really cool to be part of such a groundbreaking project. The science has not been done in endangered species like this before, so it's really neat to see what the future holds that Elizabeth Ann has helped us unlock.
Well, lucky you. Yeah, we're very happy to share it with you.
So basically, there was one ferret whose genes were not represented, and they were able to actually utilize the genes of that ferret to clone, essentially create a replica of that ferret in a live animal who we saw. It was amazing.
Whoa.
I mean, it just blows me away. And Ray, I have to ask you real quick, you've been able to visit the Frozen Zoo in San Diego, and I loved your comment when you were holding the vial of cells of black-footed ferrets. You said that it feels like hope. And I just thought that was such an amazing moment. It gave me goosebumps. Is that how it felt? I mean, just that you're holding an entire species in your hand. It was wild to me.
Yeah, it did feel very hopeful. And that was a really big departure from how it felt at the beginning, right? So the Frozen Zoo, I don't know what people might imagine when they hear those two words together. They might think like a zoo in Alaska that, in the wintertime or something that's real cold. But actually, it's just a research center at the San Diego Zoo that's not open to the public, where they have cryogenically frozen a lot of DNA and cellular material of endangered species with the hopes of using that material to make clones or, bring back this species. And I actually, and I haven't admitted this before, but I went in feeling really disappointed. I went in feeling really sad that it has come to this, that we have to look at cells under a microscope as opposed to just going out and seeing them in the wild. As much as I can be impressed with scientific innovation, I felt to myself like, this is a shame that a frozen zoo even exists, right? Shame on us as a society for getting to this place. And then I talked to the scientists. I learned about the journey. I learned about the history, the goals for the future, the amazing ways that, it's not just ferrets that we're looking at anymore. They're looking at being able to bring back to life enormous, amazing, iconic species from Africa, so white rhinos, etc.
The frozen zoo is the largest, most diverse collection of its kind. Wow. And it's a collection of skin cells from mammals, birds, reptiles, and amphibians.
I regained an appreciation for that scientific innovation that gives species a second chance. It was a big teaching moment for me. So I have to say, it sounded very poetic on camera, but it truly holding a little vial with the dry ice kind of poofing up and saying, this feels like hope. That was truly how I felt.
Yes, but that is a perfect description, which is what so many of our shows are about, is hope, talking about species. And as you say, the fact that we got so far down the road that we have a frozen zoo, but the hope is there that the remaining animals that we have, we can grow the species. Maybe this one cloned animal has enough of the genetic properties that it will be immune to the disease that's affecting the other black-footed ferrets. Maybe that can reproduce. So when I hear frozen zoo, although it's very hard to understand when you first hear it, as you described, Ray, the fact that the zoos have stayed ahead of the curve for so long knowing this was coming gives me so much hope that we are going to see species that were practically extinct that will be released back to the wild again someday.
I agree with you, Peter. One thing I learned, not at all in the context of conservation, but I carry it with me. I think, I actually am pretty sure that Kobe Bryant said this. So, basketball legend Kobe Bryant once spoke about how different people find motivation from different experiences and in different places. Some people find a lot of personal motivation from success, right? When things are going really well, whatever their project or goal is, they get motivated to give it their all. And other people find motivation when things are completely unacceptable. That's when they feel the strongest and the most energized to get involved and make a difference. And so, it makes me think about which type of person am I? But obviously anyone who worked on frozen zoos, the genetics of these black-footed ferrets, they were the people saying, this isn't going well. This is going very poorly, and that's unacceptable to me. So we are going to, expand our minds to the furthest corners to come up with some kind of inventive solution so that we're never back here again.
I will say that's why I love your show so much, because it does provide that hope, but not in a cheesy way, right? Like a lot of times, and I think a lot of times people hear conservation and they think, oh yeah, that's being done. But these are true, real projects that are making a difference that you're highlighting, and to show that in the way that you show that is just, it's incredible. And you have to be a corpse not to be, engaged with some of the amazing work that's being done out there to truly make a difference in our world. It's awesome. It really is.
Yes, and I think the point that you were making is that, yes, indeed, we're finding solutions, we're gradually making progress, but we're not saying the problem is solved. We're saying we have to be very attentive, monitor the species, stay on top of it, and always stay one step ahead of what the next problem may be. Very broadly speaking, I think the biggest problem is loss of habitat. What we have to do is save and share habitat and come to zoos like yours and learn about the wildlife to sort of set the hook, make the connection, then want to go to the wild and maybe experience them there. And the next step we hope for the future generation is, now, what can I do to help?
Well, let me ask you a question here. And I think it's a question that some of our listeners might be thinking. Is it safe for an endangered species, one that we're really, doing the most to protect, cloning, et cetera, to live on a working ranch with cattle, with people, rounding up cows all the time, with fencing, with all of that? Is that the right place for this critically endangered species?
I think it can be, in particular in this situation, because the Hogg family in particular have such a massive ranch, and their surrounding neighbors do as well, and they understand the importance of this program. So as I was mentioning, they understand how to rotate their livestock so well to ensure recovery times for grasses, for prairie dogs, which of course then support the black-footed ferret. I think in other parts of the country, maybe not. I think that's a valid question, which is where the education piece comes in. Kind of to what Peter was saying is ensuring that we get the word out of what we need these landowners to do to help out. It doesn't have to be such an invasive thing. And I think a lot of times when you talk about endangered species, landowners understandably get concerned. What does that mean for my livelihood? We use bald eagles for examples. If a bald eagle nest is on your property, you're not going to be able to cut that down. You're going to have to ensure you coexist with that animal. Sometimes that causes some grief. Wolves. Boy, here in Montana, the wolf conversation certainly is a heated one. But I understand where the concern is. But I think with the right education, the right opportunities to let those landowners know that it doesn't have to be invasive, and you can work with the U.S. government, you can work with the wildlife experts, you can truly make a difference with little effort.
Fair enough. I spent several years working in eastern Montana on the biology behind grizzly bears reclaiming their historic habitat. And I really had a lot of rude awakenings. I thought I was going to be studying bears the whole time. And instead I was like sitting at kitchen tables with ranchers and with their families and talking about their livelihoods and what kind of future they wanted to see and what kind of worries they had, not just about wild animals, but about the ranching industry, and it really helped me see that conservation has to touch all of those spaces. It has to touch economics. It has to touch the meat industry. It has to touch, all of these different areas to be effective and to include all kinds of people who've been historically excluded from these conversations. A lot of ranchers have been for decades told that they are the opposite of conservationists, and we have a lot of reconciliation to do with many of those communities of people, because these days we're realizing, well, gosh, you all are essential, and thank you for maintaining this land. And, you're giving these ecosystems a second chance, and, we need to all work together. So, I talked about hope in a jar, like microscopic cellular hope, but there's also hope when it comes to, communities working together and those collaborations and all of the cooperation that I think is kind of invisibly happening in the West, right? It doesn't make the headlines all the time. It's not on every podcast, but it is this really powerful and beautiful trend that I think is going to honestly save us all.
Absolutely. And it's a conversation that has to happen, right? We have to find that happy medium of, ensuring the livelihood, like you said, of those ranchers, and then at the same time of these animals.
Conservation is really such a collaborative effort. Ranchers, scientists, and zoos all play crucial roles. And obviously, the story of the frozen zoo and the cloned ferret Elizabeth Ann is just one example. But for so many zoos, just like the one that Jeff runs in Montana, their work is largely unseen.
If there's one thing that we as zoological parks are not good at, it's bragging. And I don't know why. I just think we need to be more vocal about the incredible work that's being done in our institutions. And the behind the scenes, I'll take it to a personal level first. The personal love, for lack of better words, that our caregivers give our animals every day is mind-boggling to me. And in a lot of situations, as a lot of zoological parks do, these are rescued animals that have no other place to go. So it's a place for them to really have their forever home. And so it's our responsibility as caregivers to do the best we can to not only mimic their natural environment, their natural behaviors, but give them a comfortable place to survive and live out their life. What I love in a lot of zoological parks, and I know you two have seen this, is the amount of training that's being done for medical procedures. For example, our tigers. Back in the day, if you needed to get blood from a tiger, you would knock that animal down, you'd get blood, but that's so stressful for the animal and for the caregiver. So let's train that animal willingly partake in that. When you and I go to the doctor, we may not like it, but when it's time to give blood, you put your arm out, You get you get your blood taken, and maybe you'll get a sucker because you did good. But with tigers, it's the same thing. They present their tail, we will take the blood, they turn around, they get a big mouthful of whipped cream, they're happy, we're happy, it's a win-win situation. So there is so much being done in the level of animal care to better the situation for the animal and then therefore the animal caretaker.
Jeff, you just very casually said that tigers get rewarded with whipped cream after a medical procedure. And I just wanted to point that out, that might be very normal for you and the staff that you have at the zoo, but that is news for us and is such a fun image to think about because they have some pretty freaking big mouths to fill with whipped cream.
I think what you've described so well, Jeff, is the transition from what zoos were in the past and what they are now. They used to be sort of a collection, sort of a postage stamp collection of how many species we could show people. Now the focus is on is the habitat naturalistic? Is the animal comfortable where it is? Does it have plenty of space? All these things that are considered now as an education center rather than sort of a menagerie collection to sort of be in awe at wildlife you see. So what you've described is what I hope more people understand about zoos and conservation centers and wildlife organizations is this wonderful transition, putting the wildlife first.
Thank you. And you're exactly right. And what I always like to tell kids especially is, back in the day when zoos were really first, becoming popular here in the U.S., literally bringing an animal from overseas and putting it, on a concrete pad behind bars, and people would point and laugh. That was the norm then. Fortunately, we've come a long way since those early years. But you're right. Now it's about providing these animals, places of essentially we're an ark, if you will, for a lot of these animals. I think, as I said before, we need to do a better job of explaining why we need to exist.
Jeff, I have a fun question. And Peter, you can chime in too if you want to. I would love to hear yours. But, we're talking about like frozen zoos and cloning, right? I mean, I'm just telling you, when I was a kid, there were just like action movies about evil clones left and right. And now clones are my new favorite thing because they're a solution. But are there animals that are gone now that you kind of wish we had this technology to clone and do conservation work with? Like, do you have a favorite extinct animal that you kind of wish we had cloned?
Certainly cloning is such an interesting topic, right? Because it's controversial. We have the technology. Does that mean that we should have the ability to clone animals? And I'm a firm believer that if we're cloning wildlife that has directly gone extinct or is going extinct because of us, then yeah, I think because we have the technology, I think we have the obligation to do so, right? So that's kind of my personal belief. If there was one species I could bring back, it'd be the dodo bird. I just think they are just what an amazing animal that bird was. Again, goes back to my bird nerd feelings, but I just think an animal that was eradicated specifically because of humans. But what a cool bird that would be to see. I mean, we were somewhat close with the kiwi, but not quite. I mean, I just think seeing a dodo in person and being able to work with a dodo would be amazing. And what an amazing name it has too.
I was thinking the same animal, but to back up a little bit, the idea of cloning just seems so bizarre and strange and so futuristic. But then I think back when our national bird was disappearing, and we thought we absolutely using DDT is part of agricultural use. And then we figured it out, and we don't have DDT anymore. And look what's happening to the eagle population. Then the same thing with condors. There were 23 left, and the idea of collecting them seems so risky. And why would we ever do that? And it was done, and now there's over 500, many flying free in the wild again. So I think when we look at what we need to do to save endangered species in the wild, now may seem like sort of a wild-eyed prospect. How about the idea of having a frozen zoo? Who would have ever thought of that before? And now we know that can be successful and it works. So I think we need to continue to all work together to be sure we can continue to do this with as many species as we can.
Jeff, it's been so beautiful having you on because you are such a gem of a person, and it really shows because you care about endangered species, you care about non-endangered species, right? Like you care about human communities. You care about future generations who are interested in getting involved. You just seem like such an open book, a welcoming presence, and the conservation community is just, in a debt of gratitude for having you as one of us. And it's been such a joy to have you on our show.
So think of all the four-legged critters and the winged critters, and now we uprights who thank you for all that you do.
Well, thank you both for your kind words. Incredible. I mean, just it means the world to me, and I'm honored and humbled to be a part of this whole journey that you two are on and the show is on. I'm just honored to be a part of it. So thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Thanks, Jeff.
Absolutely. So before we wrap up our interview, I just have to share this really fun, totally behind-the-scenes story, just in order to give our listeners an image of what Peter is like when he gets a chance to hop on an ATV while filming and just ride around a huge ranch.
You may not remember this, Peter, but of course, boys will be boys. And as we were kind of wrapping up the filming, we all decided we were going to race back to the house.
No, you
and
didn't.
We were going down this little 2-track road, and I saw Peter ahead. And I don't know if you hit a rock or what, but I saw Peter flying up. I thought for sure he was going to go off that four-wheeler. I was cracking up. I had dust in my face. I was impressed. He was able to maintain control, and I think he ended up winning the race. But the point was, we had some fun. It was a great time, and again, something that I will look back fondly on forever.
It was great. It was wonderful, and I'm glad you get to see that. It wasn't my first ATV rodeo,
I could tell the way you recovered was impressive.
You didn't know they could fly, did you?
I had no idea. I didn't know you could fly, but you did.
All right, Peter, we're going to share some ferret facts with each other, and I'm going to go first, all right? The average lifespan of a ferret in the wild is between 1 and 3 years, but in that time, they can grow up to 2 feet long.
A black-footed ferret primarily feeds on prairie dogs, but they also consume squirrels, mice, and other rodents.
So black-footed ferrets are North America's only native ferret species.
Although they're cute, it's illegal to own an endangered black-footed ferret.
Black-footed ferrets are solitary animals that live alone. But in May and June, the females give birth to litters of 1 to 6 kits, which they raise on their own.
There was a time not that long ago when the black-footed ferret seemed to be doomed to disappear from the prairies of the American West. But as we heard today, ranchers, scientists, conservationists, and yes, a dog named Shep came together to give this species a second chance. The story of the black-footed ferret is a reminder that if we protect wildlife today, we can ensure magical moments in the wild kingdom for future generations.
A lot of times people fear these radical ideas, and if you just stick with it, it becomes the norm and it works, right? And certainly it doesn't mean there's not going to be times of failure. I mean, that's all part of it. But at the end of the day, right, if we can normalize some of these incredible ideas, then I think we could save entire species. That's incredible, as we're seeing.
Join us next week on the podcast when we talk to Dr. Jenny Adler. Jenny's an underwater photojournalist who's spent countless hours documenting the beauty of our planet's vast oceans and their threatened underwater forests.
When you're diving and when you're in the ocean, that's the only thing that you're thinking about. You might get distracted because you're getting wrapped up in the kelp, but that is a way better problem, I think, than having to respond to emails and text messages. Just being able to float there and be actually completely weightless is something that I just feel like there's nowhere else on earth that you can experience that.
That's next time on Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, the podcast.
Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, the podcast, is a production of Pineapple Street Studios and Mutual of Omaha.
Our senior producer is Stephen Key. Producers are Zandra Ellen and Jenny Van Solen. Associate producer is Lisa Cerda. Editor is Darby Maloney. Executive producers are Barry Finkel, Gabrielle Lewis, and Jen Wolfe. Pineapple's head of sound and engineering is Raj Makija. Senior audio engineers are Marina Pais, Davy Sumner, Javi Cruces, and Pedro Alvira. Additional engineering by Rob Miller and Jason Richards. This episode was mixed by Davy Sumner.
Production music courtesy of Epidemic Sound and Hearst Media Production Group.
episode clips courtesy of Hearst Media Production Group. Fact-checking by Justine Dahm. Marketing and promotion by Emily Paschal. This podcast is hosted by me, Dr. Raywyn Grant.
And me, Peter Gross. A special thanks to Caitlin Williams, Sophie Radmilovich, and Stephanie Diaz.
Today's episode is based on the Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom series created by Don Meyer. Our next episode will be out in a week.
Make sure you listen on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.